Thanks to everyone joining today. We have a number of attendees still coming into the webinar. We're going to give it just another few seconds. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Hear Me, Black Voices on Their Pain and Anger. This is the first in our Race Matters series. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few things to help you get the most from today's experience. When you logged in, you connected via computer audio by default. If you cannot hear or your connection is unclear, try logging out and back in first. Or join over the phone. You can select an arrow next to the microphone icon in the toolbar to show options. Click Switch to Phone Setting for a list of dial-in numbers or call yourself. Everyone is muted today to ensure an excellent audio quality. You may submit questions or comments at any time. Please do so through the question and answer pane accessed via the toolbar. We will do our best to answer a few at the end of today's session. However, due to our very large number of attendees, we apologize in advance if we're unable to get to your question. Today's session is being recorded and will be made available post-event. You will receive a conference link and email. And now, I would like to introduce you to today's host, Mike Hyder.
Thank you, Donna. And hello, everyone. I am absolutely thrilled to be a part of this experience, and I'm looking forward to the dialogue. And thank you all for taking time out of your schedules to join us. The topic, Hear Me, Black Voices on Their Pain and Anger, is our theme. And racism is an emotionally explosive word, yet some believe that corporations have rejected it as a serious problem. And while diversity and inclusion has been championed in businesses globally for years, the reality is that many people still feel underrepresented, not treated equally, or feel that they don't have a voice. And in the wake of the tragic killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others before them, it's time to tackle this difficult subject head on. That's the purpose of why we're here today. This is the first of 4 webinars that we at Korn Ferry will be hosting as we explore what business leaders at all levels can say and do to tackle racism in their organizations. Today's session is about listening and hearing, and the other series will be geared more towards actions and next steps. I am joined today by 3 of my colleagues who also happen to be friends. Audra Bohannon, one of our senior partners at Korn Ferry, JT Saunders, one of our senior consultants, and Nia Amani Heslop, who is an analyst with the firm. And I'm also excited that we have our CEO and leader, Gary Burnison, with us this morning as well. Hi, Gary.
Hello,
Why
Mike.
are you here today? Why are you here today?
Well, I'm here because it's time to take meaningful action, and that starts, as you said, with actively and intensively listening. If you want to get change in the world, it starts with you. And so we have all seen what has happened over the years. We're angry, we're sad, but ultimately we want to take action. And the reality is you can't get better without understanding. And so we all have to be vulnerable. We have to have empathy, and quite candidly, CEOs, including myself, must be better. We all must be better. And whenever I've said, I've used the word leadership, I think of empowerment. In this case, I think it's time for CEOs to use power to drive change. We, as you said, Mike, we purposefully didn't use the word diversity or inclusion. We use the word racism because that's exactly what we're talking about. So this conversation is meant to be open, to be transparent, to talk about the good and the bad and the ugly. And that's exactly the way it is intended. So I want to thank my colleagues for being vulnerable, for being open, and for sharing their experiences. So thank you to each of you. My heart is with you. And so back to you, Mike. Thank you.
Mike,
Thank you, Gary. I'm glad that you're with us. And thank you, Audra, for telling me to turn my phone on. With today's theme as Black Voices on Their Pain and Anger, our panel is here to discuss their experiences and perspectives on what and how they're managing during this time, and how they're navigating between the external forces as also within their organization. Audra and JT and Nia also represent three generations. You know, we have representation with baby boomers as well as Gen X and Gen Z. And I'd like you to think about this experience, for those of you who are listening in, as a conversation. Imagine we're sitting around at the dinner table and having a family discussion about these three topics. You know, we're going to address how do you feel, what do you need, and what are your hopes for the future. Thematically is what we're going to talk about. So let me get started, and I just want to ask this question of the three of you. Given all that's going on, how are you? How are you?
Yeah. You know, Mike, the word that comes to mind immediately is thankful, but I want to tell you a story about why I say thankful. About 20 years ago, I was 18 years old. I had bought my first car, and I'm happy to say I did it on my own dime. So it was my first grown-up decision, and now as a parent, I can appreciate that more so today than I did then. But I had a new car, and I was with two of my friends. All three of us were African-American males, and we were joyriding. It was late at night. It was a Friday. It was after a football game. Football was a big deal where I grew up, and I was pulled over. In fact, I was pulled over at a drive-through window, believe it or not. And I was approached by two police officers, one on the right side of my car, one on the left. The one who approached me had his hand on his gun and eventually drew his gun and directed at me. And I have to tell you, I wasn't a kid who got into trouble. Okay, the most trouble I got into was detention, and I think I had detention 3 times while I was in high school. So I was kind of a goody two shoes a little bit. But at that point, that was the first time I saw a gun, and that was the first time I saw a gun pointed at me. And it was in that moment I realized how frightened, how scared, frankly, how shocked I was, and powerless in that instance. And I never forget that. Now, then I was all of those emotions, but today I'm thankful, because as we've seen a number of these people whose lives have been taken due to violence here, I can't help but think that could have been me. That could have been me. And I have a daughter who's almost driving age, and it is a worry that I carry with me as she wants to go out in the world and be independent and get her first car. It's a fear that I carry because I realize that a good corporate job, living in a good community, having a college education doesn't wipe away that fear, and it doesn't take away the possibility that that could be her too. And so I wear that with me, and I manage through that every day. So I am thankful, but I'm hurting and concerned.
Yeah, you know what? To sort of tag along, you know, to connect back to what you just said, JT. My heart is heavy, and it's been heavy for a while. But what's happened over the last 2 weeks has just created a deep weight, and it takes me to a place where I start feeling the same kind of stories that JT just shared. And let me just connect 2 stories together, and it'll make sense around how I'm feeling and why my heart is so heavy. the one person that I have the greatest regard for and was my role model was my father. He was a stoic man. He was a quiet man. He was a man of few words. And I remember when I was coming of age, he set me down one day. And I, again, do everything, whatever he does, I want to do it too. But he set me down. He said, baby girl, let me give you some advice. White people will kill you. Do not trust them. Mm. And I went, Dad, he says, and he was going back to when he was in the war and all the discrimination and the racism that he saw in the war. And he said, and I'm talking about they will kill you. And it wasn't just physical death, but it was also spiritual and emotional death. And then fast forward a little bit, I was talking with a friend one day, and she came up with a term I thought was fascinating. And it waved my heart yet again. And she talked about spirit murder. And I said, what do you mean by spirit murder? She says, Audra, it's when things happen in your life where it chips and chips and chips away at your spirit. So my last story just sort of connects with my father saying, white people will kill you. And then this piece from my friend talking about spirit murder. I was with my nephew. He is 6'2", 200 pounds. He is in his 30s. We're together and we're going on a trip. He wants to get into cybersecurity. I had a friend who was running it. We went to the company so he could see it. And he lives in Detroit. I live in Boston. We're on our way back to the airport and we're getting ready to depart in our different directions. I go to the airport all the time. I live in an airport. I'm so used to going to security and keep on moving. I go through security and I keep on moving, but I got to wait for my nephew. I turn around and I can't find him. And I find him over in an area and they have to check him and they have to make sure there's nothing wrong with him. And oh, by the way, my nephew had on khaki pants and a white shirt. He did not have on a hoodie. He did not have his pants hanging below his butt. He had on khaki pants and a white shirt. And the way they treated my nephew brought tears to my eyes. And I could not contain myself. And I just said, excuse me, what in the world are you doing? And my nephew looked at me and he said, Auntie, this happens to me all the time. And I said, this is what it is. How you can kill somebody's spirit by treating him in a way that is not right. And when he came through, we had a good conversation about it. But it's those kinds of things that connect me back to what my father said and what my friend said around treatment and when it's done to you in a way that really is harmful. So I'm going to pass it to you, Nia.
Yeah. Thank you, Audra. You know, what you were saying about spiritual murder and the killing of one's spirit over time, that hit me because it makes me think back to when I was around 10 years old, and it was roughly 2006 or so. And you know, I'm a girl born and raised in New York. I'm from the Bronx, and this is around the time of when Sean Bell was shot. There were roughly 50 rounds that were fired out by the NYPD, and I was 10. You know, it was around Thanksgiving time, so there was family around. They were talking about it, and that was my first real memory of what this was like. And I know this has been going on long before I'm born, but that was my first real crystallized memory of my family sitting there and us having that kind of conversation and not knowing why it was done. Mm-hmm. And also later on finding out that all 4 of those officers were found not guilty in the sentencing. So I think about that, but then I also think about the fact that, you know, at 5 years old until 18 years old, I went to a private PWI school on the Upper East Side. And, you know, I was one of very few African Americans. And I remember there were points in time where I would want to say, I just smile, I'd be happy, I say it's okay, I hold out hope. But there were those moments where I used to have pencils stuck in my hair, protractors and or rulers, just to see if it would stick in my hair. And it's a joke, it was supposed to be funny, but it hurt. And for me, I had to smile. I just say, you know what, I hold out hope. University is going to be better. it's going to be better when I get to university, you know? And I get to university and it wasn't. It wasn't better. I could tell you all of the stories that we used to hear and that we'd see and that would get published about racism in the university. But I'll tell you one that I remember particularly. It was my graduation day, it was 2017. And I was on my way to graduation. I was so happy, 4 long, hard-fought years. I was in the car and I was going. And then I get an email from the police department from my university, and it said that there was a stabbing of an African-American male by a student who goes to my university, and it was racially motivated. And that cloud sat over my head because that African-American student was 3 days away from graduating from university, and it was my graduation day. And as I'm there and I'm celebrating and I want to be happy for my accomplishments, I also have to think about the fact that that could have been me. That could have been a brother of mine. That could have been my best friend. You know, that could be any of us. And we want to have all these hopes and all these dreams for the future. But at the same time, there's always that memory in the back of your head making you think, that reminder of how valuable your life truly is in this country. And so my words, I'd say, for how I'm feeling is, I'm tired. I am heartbroken, but at the same time, I'm hopeful. And I want to be hopeful because I'm just starting my journey in corporate America. And I want to be hopeful that corporate America can step up and they can make those changes. And I can be a part of the changes that we need. So many emotions, very conflicting. I'd say that's how I am.
Yeah.
You know, I so appreciate you all sharing, you know, and as JT, listening to your story about that situation and the, you know, just from a college perspective, you know, I have my stepson, who's the youngest of our 5 children, is now he's 21 years of age, but I remember when he was 13 years old, Trayvon Martin was killed in 2012. And that was the first time, you know, that his mother and I actually, you know, had a targeted conversation with him. And he was always a tall kid. So, you know, he's a basketball player, so he's tall, really tall now. He was tall then. And so there was always this over concern about him being perceived older than he is because he was so tall. So we were just really concerned about it. And Trayvon Martin's death was an opportunity to talk about it. And in retrospect, you think about in the 8 years or so, we've had that conversation with him. It feels like 2 or 3 times a year, as opposed to it being sort of this novel conversation. And I don't know if I've ever shared this, where the fear of concern every time he was out of the house, and the comfort and peace that only happened when he returned home. You know, so I mean, it's almost like it's just sort of a natural, normal expression. He's home, so we can go to sleep now. You know, because there's always that fear. When we moved into the neighborhood where my wife and I live now, he was in college. He's a rising senior now that he's finished his junior year. So that's why, Nia, when I was just thinking about, you were talking about your college experience, but he's home now. He was doing online classes, and then he's home for a few weeks before basketball resumes. The significance of my wife sending an email to all of the homes in our neighborhood through our Neighborhood Watch website that we have, to share with everyone we didn't know, you know, this is our son, this is what he looks like. You know, he likes to jog, he's an athlete, he plays basketball, you may see him around, and we just wanted everybody to know that he belonged there. And just the fact that that's energy that we just have to manage. Now, I'm heartened to say that we received hundreds of emails from neighbors expressing disappointment that she had to send that, and expressing we've been invited to more homes and he's been invited to more opportunities to play basketball in their basketball courts. But it's just the fact that that fear is real for us. It has only been illuminated since the situations that have been going on recently. So I went there when you talked about your respective stories. I mean, we all have them. You know,
yes,
and
we do.
I heard what sounds like a feeling of pain and anger and maybe rage. Would that be an accurate depiction? And if so, why do you feel that way? I think it would be important to share that with others.
I think everything you just said, Mike, from an emotional state is what I feel. And I would probably add a couple of more things: pain, anger, rage, frustration, and going back to what Nia said about being tired. You know, doing this work for so long and talking to people within many organizations that look just like me, and to hear those stories that are universal, it is really tough out there. And there are things that you just keep trying to tap down the emotion. You just keep trying to push it down, and come to work and smile and just be, it's a great place to be, and just do what you have to do. But underneath it, all this is information. So, you know, when we think about what's happening with the civil unrest and all that's going on in the world, that's one thing. But how do you think all of that shows up within corporate America, which is where most of the people that are out in our community listening to us sit? Because for professional, it is showing up some kind of way, and it is feeling that pressure on us around what we can do, the low expectations. I'm telling you, if I go to one more company and I walk in and I ask them, so how many Black folks do you have at the senior level? And if I'm talking to Black folks, they do this. Count on one hand. If I walk into a room within a corporation and I look around, I can count on one hand. What is all of that saying? Is it saying that we're not smart enough? That we don't have the potential? That we were born stupid? That we don't have the package? We don't have everything that it takes to be able to move forward? Something is going on. And the outcome of that, in terms of how we are moving in an organization and our mobility and being able to do everything else anybody else does, has been truncated. And I got one more thing that causes me to be tired. I really wish somebody would let the word qualified minority go. Because when you say qualified minorities, do you also say qualified white people? So you're getting a whole lot from me, because I feel all of it. I'm tired of it. I'm frustrated at days. The rage is there, but I keep it all in a place where I can continue to serve. But I'm not unique. It is out and about with all of our colleagues across corporate America that look just like us.
Yeah, you know, Audrey, to that point, the word that comes to mind that I think helps to describe what you just said is this idea of feeling muted, right? Because you have to push down so much of these headwinds in order to show up in the world. And I think we worked on some projects together, and I'll never forget a quote that one of the executives shared with us: "I can't afford to have a bad behavior day." And so I think, you know, to your point, it's this idea that I have to show up in a space, even if I'm not feeling my best, but I have to prove my value and worth every day. But I want to say something I think is really important here, that as we have this conversation, I want to be clear: this is not a victim conversation. This is not about victimhood. No. This is about understanding an experience and the headwinds that help create that experience for people within this community who are living within corporate spaces and are managing the duality of their identity with their ambitions, with their, you know, with the awesomeness that they bring to the organization every day. And I think for me, I'm compelled to ask, you know, for my colleagues, for my diverse colleagues, that I want you to understand that my experience is my experience. And you don't necessarily have to understand my experience. It may not be something you've experienced, but in fact, it is my experience, and it does, in fact, shape who I am and how I show up every day. And I think just being aware of that, I think would help us have these these conversations about, it's not about capability, right? It's not that we can't do it. We're also managing a lot of other stuff too that could be getting in the way.
Yeah.
But you know what, JT, and it's not that we can't do it. We want to do it.
We want to do
to
it.
contribute. We want to be at our best. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So considering that we're sitting around the table, you know, as a family talking about these topics and giving people, you know, just by virtue of the conversation, insights to things that you may not normally see if we were being met with by people outside of this table. What do you need? Like, what do you need in the face of all that's been shared? It would be helpful just to hear, like, what do you need?
Okay, this is what I need. One of the things we talk about a lot in our organization is the power of choice. So my need is for people to choose to engage with each other, to understand that Black folks got just as much potential as anybody else, to believe in our capability to do an outstanding work at the highest levels within an organization. Did you hear me say the word believe a couple of times? So that's what I need. I need the evidence and the demonstration of belief in Black talent. If that was a need that could be met, I would be. Oh.
I'm right there with you, Audra. I'm right there with you. I think the belief is important, but I also think for me, I'm going to say it in a slightly different way, it's giving me a shot. It's giving people like me a shot within an organization to prove not even prove, to show you of my capability. Right? I think that's what I need. I need people more people like me to be given the shot, right, to have a seat at the table.
Yeah, JT, Audra, I completely feel all that what you say, and it's funny because I think about a memory that I have because I'm new to the firm, I'm new to corporate America, and my need, two things come to mind. I need to see visible Black leaders. I need to see people who look like me above me. So it gives me the visualization that I can make it and that I can do what they did. I can accomplish what they did. I think about my first couple of days at the firm. I started out in our college startup program. And I remember seeing Audra and JT on my third day of being there. And I remember looking around the room and I remember seeing the other African Americans in that room, and I could just see it and I could feel it, that we could breathe and that we could relax and that there was vision and that there was hope for us, that we could also rise in this organization. And that, I don't want us to forget that that's important. It's important for people to see that they can be something bigger than they are, that they can grow, and that our talent is just as good as anybody else's. We have the potential. Let us show it to you. But at the same time, I also know that I need our organizations and our leaders to want to work, to want to be able to work alongside us to make that change. It's tough, and we know it, and change doesn't come quickly. But what's important is for us to want to make that change and do it together. We have seen so many protests over the years over these kinds of horrific acts done to African Americans. And we've seen so many people come out and make public statements and how important those things are. But I want to also let us know and remind us that it's one thing to talk, it's a different thing to act. Mm-hmm. And now is a time that we're all seeing it and we all know it, and we need to act. And I think corporate America has that capacity to make that change, to make that structural change, and to be that change. And I'm willing. I'm young. I'm just starting. I have the fight in me. I am so willing to do it.
I have to acknowledge Gary Burnison, who's with us. He's our family member too. And as our CEO and leader, the starter program originated with him. So there's this sweet moment that's going on relative to you, the future, and I just want to just virtually hug you, Nia. But there's this energy, and I want to ask Gary if you could go off mute for a second and just ask you this question, just in general, because your support has been so amazing as we are going on this journey as an organization. How are you feeling, being sort of at the head of this movement within Korn Ferry these days? Because I just want people to benefit from your feelings and expression about it too. Like, how are you feeling?
I've had all sorts of emotions. I mean, listening to this and listening to my colleagues, tears have come in my eyes. I'm not Black. I don't know what it means to have a gun pointed at me. I don't know what it means to be discriminated against. I grew up without any money, but I'm white, and I don't know what it means to be Black. So, I think that, the political class allegedly works for the people, and that's great, but there needs to be change. This is unacceptable. There is racism. We have to be honest with ourselves. And so we have to drive change. This can't be about talk. And I believe, and I would encourage every CEO, this is something you can't outsource. And so I don't know as a CEO whether you can stamp out racism in people's heart. I don't think people are born to hate other people. I honestly don't believe that. I believe they're born to love other people. And so, as a CEO, you can develop a lot of things. You can delegate a lot of things. But this is one that you can't outsource. This is one where we, as CEOs, have to use power, not empower. And the change is not going to come from minorities, and I use that humbly, but it has to, face it, the CEOs are largely white. It has to come from the top down, and it has to be intentional.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's good that your voice is included too. This circumstance we're in right now feels different. Does this feel differently to you? I mean, just the whole energy that we're all sort of managing globally, does it feel different? And if so, why? Why do you think it feels?
Well, for me, it's a yes and a no. I think, the no is, in some ways, this recent incident with killing of George Floyd, I think almost feels like an old tape. We've seen this play out. We've seen what the outcome usually is. But I say yes because this feels somewhat different for me. And Garrett, thank you so much for what you just shared, because I think that speaks to where we are going as a community, that there are people in the streets who are protesting. And I'm not saying rioting, I'm saying protesting intentionally. People who are thinking about how we can advocate, support, and serve as allies for people who frankly don't have a voice. And to me, that's inspiring. That is the beacon of hope. I think that we all need to manage short. Nia, you talk about this as well. I think this is our moment. This is our moment to build self-awareness within and outside of corporation, and to then direct action in terms of how do we help manage our way through this so that we don't have to have keep having these conversations. We can move beyond the conversation and move straight into action, because that's what's going to make a difference here.
I would agree 100%. I mean, the only tweak that I would add to what you just said, JT, is that I've seen more white folk involved in the protest. I've seen the statement around silence is unacceptable. I've heard from colleagues who I care about dearly representing their truth. So it's a different level of engagement, even though it feels like this is one more time.
Fair.
And I'd say, Audra, to build on that, you know, there are so many different people, and it's a global thing too, that people are seeing that there's something not right, and that racism is racism and racism is wrong. And I would add on to that let's keep in mind that we're in a global pandemic. And this is still happening.
Yeah, that's right.
It's still happening. People are still out there. People are still protesting hand in hand. Doesn't matter your background, because they know that this is wrong and that racism is wrong, and that we're sick of it. And it's time for us to stand alongside our African American colleagues, our African American friends, and fight it together. Because that allyship, JT, you mentioned that allyship, that's important. So I think that's what I'd add. Let's not forget that we're in a global pandemic, and this is still top of mind and important for everything. That speaks volume.
Yeah. I was having a conversation with a colleague a few days ago who, and she said it in a way I thought was this really point right on, was when the Central Park incident happened and it was caught on camera, there was an obvious weaponizing of the police by someone who was faking distress in order to get the police to come and address a situation that didn't call for it. I mean, so it was sort of seen by millions of people that play out because of it, because it was on tape. And so that sort of created the beginning of sort of a connecting the dots between people complaining about it, but you're not seeing it, so you don't really know if it's really true. So you're trying to be, and then a few days, I mean, literally, it wasn't even a week, a few days later, when that police officer and his knee on George Floyd's neck, with his hand in his pocket, basically staring at everyone who was taping openly and screaming at him, and he still resisted doing anything about it. I mean, so it was like this blatant sort of representation of I will not be accountable for this decision that I made. And for people to see, it's like some people began to see, and I'm just using people who weren't Black, began to see behind the curtain about something, and it was almost like they're horrified about it, but there were probably thousands of these situations that had happened between Trayvon Martin and this one that you just didn't see, but it did create a sort of a new energy, you know, relative to that. So what do you hope for going forward? Like what do you hope for? Audra?
My hope is that we will not be silent any longer. Sort of stand to the side and observe and maintain the status quo. And 6 months or 8 months from now, we get to the other side. I hope we don't do that. My hope is that this is a tipping point. This is something that should haunt all of us and help us to think about what can we do based on where we sit to make it better. So I want to go back to the whole notion of making it better. So that is what my hope is that we commit to that and we refuse to go back, or we refuse to hang in the space of status quo.
Yeah, Audrey, you say it so eloquently. For me, I'm hoping that people hear us. You know, I mean, that's what we're here to talk about. But I'm hoping that people hear us and hear the authenticity and the reality that is our experience. And from this, hopefully, this serves as a catalyst for change. And it could be large scale change, but it could also be incremental change, because I think the reality is change never happens overnight. But to your point, Audra, I don't want 6 months to pass by, a year to pass by, and we forget about George Floyd, and it becomes just another day until the next issue happens. I'm hoping that this serves as the point of the catalyst for change that allows us to dig our heels into the ground and make a stand around helping us to manage our way through racism as it stands, but also develop the means, the language to have conversations about the historic legacy of what racism has done to this country and how it shows up today. That's really what I hope for.
Okay. Thanks.
I think we're all agreed on this, actually. I really do, because, you know, I know change takes a while, but I want real and authentic change. You know, I don't have kids yet, and I want them one day. But I don't want my kids to have to go through, you know, what I've gone through, to have to listen to, you know, someone call my sister a monkey to her face. I don't want to have to listen to that. I don't want to have my children experience the same things that my parents have and that, you know, everyone in this room have experienced. I want that real and authentic change. And I want us to work for it. And we all know change takes time. It takes a lot of time, and that we're all in our own, you know, different diversity and inclusion journeys. We all have something to learn. We are learning our purpose. We are learning the effects that we can have on this planet. We're learning all that we can do. And that is a journey. It's an experience. But we also need to realize that we can meet each other where we are in that journey, and we can go forward together. And I don't want this event, the most recent event to happen, to go away and just have things go back to normal, because that hurts. That really, really hurts. And it hurts the youth as well, because it's ingraining in us. And Audra, I think you said it pretty well. It's ingraining in us this idea of what insanity truly is. And if you keep doing something over and over and over again, the same way, and hoping for a change, and that change will not come, that's insanity. And that's something that can have a lasting effect, and it has had a lasting effect over all these years in our physical genes. And I don't want to carry that on, the genes, into my children. I really, really don't. It's so much more than what we have done in the time that we've had together today. There's more work to be done. I want us all to leave this invigorated to know that we can make a change wherever we are in our journeys, and there are people who will meet you there. And that allyship, that's going to create the change, because we can't do it on our own. We can't. We've done that for years. The change has to come when we all work together, of all of our different backgrounds, different races, ethnicities, genders, beliefs, and do it also on a global scale, because the world is watching us. They were watching us in the 60s. They've been watching us ever since, and they're really watching how America is now. And that's important. And we are at that pivotal moment that we can really, really go and make that change. So I'm hopeful for it, because I'm in the youth, and we can do that. So we need your help.
Thank you. Thank you, Mia. You know, there are a number of questions, and we don't have time for all of them, but I wanted to at least acknowledge, you know, some questions that were asked. So let's just sort of, and one, you know, Gary, I'd like you to feel free to participate in the response to this. how can leaders create a safe space without fear of retribution for speaking up in their organizations? How can leaders do that?
You just have to do it. I mean, you know, that is, and it's hard. You know, we had a call on Monday, as you know, and Mike,
Right.
it was your idea and another colleague's idea. You sent me an email Sunday morning at 7:35, and I said, let's do it sooner rather than later. And as a white male, and having that call, listening to that is painful. It's very, very hard. And on the call that we had at Korn Ferry, our first value is inclusion, but we have to be much more proactive in that. And on the call, when there's a chat box and it says, hey, an hour ago I was just subject to racism, the CEO has to hear that, and the CEO has to do something about it. There's just no other way with a topic like this.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you. Thank you. Another question that surfaced was, how can we get to a point where we don't see color or gender? I have an opinion, but I'm going to let one of my colleagues go first. Audra, do you want to?
Yeah. Sure. Well, I don't know if you ever want to, I don't know if I want you not to see my gender or my race. That's how I self-identify, and it's very important to me. What I think is more important is, no matter how different you are, how do you treat people with appreciation and not just tolerate them? So that's all. That's what I want. I want you, I love who I am, and I want you to embrace it and love it too, and for us to be able to work together. That works for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good.
Well said.
Thank you.
Well said.
Thank you. Well said.
Well said.
And I'm getting the it's time to wrap up energy. So let me just proceed by saying thank you all for sharing. With the pandemic and unemployment and racism and the social unrest as a result, so many people are managing emotions, and it's just important to note, and I hope people that are watching can recognize that we may seem okay, but likely aren't. And we won't necessarily show it, but we hope that the discussion helps to highlight the importance of leaning in and listening, as Gary and others have referenced, and providing an empathetic ear. Here's what you can do as a result of this conversation. I just want to leave with a couple of takeaways. Is we want you to just educate yourself. Become educated, and watch documentaries, read material and literature about differences and cultural differences, and just become more aware what the experiences are for others, so that you can be more empathetic about that, as opposed to sort of neutral. But more importantly, we're asking that you have the courage to reach out and talk, and to learn and to listen. Courage to reach out and talk, and recognize we aren't perfect. We're going to make mistakes. It's leaning into things with an intention of learning, as opposed to afraid of making mistakes, so you don't talk at all, is really where the opportunity is. So those are the two things that we really strongly encourage you to do after this session has ended. And I just want to remind you of the 3 additional webinars in the series. Stand By Me, How Whites Can Become Authentic Allies, is scheduled for this Tuesday. In My Shoes, Addressing Systemic Racism Through Structural Inclusion, is on Wednesday, June 10th. And then Don't Talk, Do, How to Create a Racially Equitable Future as Inclusive Leaders. We're very excited about these webinars. We're very excited about the interest But more importantly, we're very excited that you took your time today to give us an opportunity to share and have sort of a seat at the table as this family discussed how we feel
Yes,
and what our
indeed.
hopes are on this topic.
Thank you.
It's been a privilege to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all
Thank
for
you
coming.
so much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
We appreciate you all being here. The session is now over, and everyone be safe.
Thank you.